Today's speaker is Reverend Dr. David Joy. He is the principal of Kerala United Theological College, Trivandrum. Earlier, he worked as the New Testament professor in United Theological College, Bengaluru. A warm welcome to Achan and all the participants to this program.
Dr. Matthew Koshi, the Director of Ecological Concerns of Synod, and my dear colleagues, fellow pastors, friends. This is indeed a unique platform where we discuss how to interpret the Bible in a meaningful manner by bringing out ecological concerns and insights. Today, I've been asked to give an introduction to Book of Hebrews along with two prescribed articles. I was telling Dr. Matthew Koshi, I will not take more than an hour because these two articles are tough stuff. Therefore, I should give you a capsule type interpretation, explanation to enable you to go through the article, understand the article in a right manner. And there will be time for you to raise questions and concerns at the end of each part of my presentation. My presentation will have roughly 3 parts. Each part will consist of 20-22 minutes. First part will be an introduction to the book of Hebrews. Book of Hebrews, as we know, it's been discussed, over-discussed, used, abused by many of the interpreters over the years. But the right study of book of Hebrews could not be done for various reasons. I underline these points because in the theological colleges, I see most of you are theologically trained people. Theological colleges, we do not have a space to teach book of Hebrews at the BD level. Only the specialist MDH students will have an opportunity to discuss book of Hebrews at a higher level. I taught book of Hebrews a couple of years at United Theological College, Bangalore, and it's amazing. One batch in 2018 brought out a book entitled The Book of Hebrews, collection of 12 essays, which is the only contribution, only monograph, edited book available in India on Book of Hebrews. Then you will know how the Book of Hebrews is important in the study of New Testament. Why this is neglected or ignored by the interpreters or preachers? It's because of its content. It's tough content. It's precise theological articulation. You cannot interpret book of Hebrews. You cannot understand book of Hebrews because book of Hebrews has used a lot of Old Testament imageries, adopting from Exodus, Deuteronomy, and even some prophetic books with a different meaning. When book of Hebrews says Moses, land, earth, Abraham, faith, all those things, covenant, all those things will have a new meaning attributed by the first century Christians. So one should know very clearly about the Old Testament background and vocabulary to study book of Hebrews. Second, I see someone raised a hand. Should I stop now and address or later?
Later will go.
Later. Okay. At the end of my session, I will, maybe after 20 minutes, I will take up that question. Okay. Then the Hellenistic writers of New Testament, the writers who had very good knowledge in the Hebrew and Greek, contributed chapters to the book of Hebrews. And the third aspect is one should have a clear idea about the history of the first century. This mainly it was written for Jewish Christians. Jewish Christians who lived in Alexandria. Alexandria was a colony of Jewish Christians where they wanted to maintain the sanctity of their identity, the sanctity of their land, the sanctity of their covenant, the sanctity of all the ceremonies and rituals related to the land. And they forgot the fact that Egyptians and many other countries through which they had gone through, were still colonized and under the colonial imperial power, namely Greek or Roman power. So three things are important. One is knowledge, very good knowledge in terms of Old Testament to understand Book of Hebrews. Very good knowledge in terms of not only New Testament Greek, but also Hellenistic Greek. Third, good knowledge about the background history in terms of understanding the first century Christianity, at least the historical knowledge in terms of Alexandria. It is not an easy task, because if you see the commentaries written and the monographs written on Book of Hebrews, it's not one or two. From 1930 to 1980, with a span of 50 years, you could see at least 400 to 600 commentaries and research papers, books were written on Book of Hebrews. So many people showed interest in terms of Book of Hebrews. But the misinterpretation and the misuse of some verses from Book of Hebrews to protect the interest of Israel while occupying Palestine, and atrocities and the tension between Israel and Palestine stopped many Christians from interpreting Book of Hebrews. And there was a very famous New Testament scholar who tried his level best, level best to interpret from a socio-rhetorical context, socio-rhetorical interpretation of Book of Hebrews. Let's take a quick glance through the background of Book of Hebrews. This is a book which was interpreted and discussed by the first century Christians, including the early fathers of the church, because they could find a lot of meaning in terms of the understanding of Book of Hebrews in Jewish history, Hellenistic history, Jesus movement, and the involvement of disciples. Therefore, many early fathers of the church and the theologians of the church in the first century and second century used the Book of Hebrews to promote some of the theological ideas, particularly Christology. And 4 or 5 leading themes in the New Testament are discussed in Book of Hebrews. Christology, covenant, pneumatology, and Old Testament history and eschatology. Of course, the famous passages about faith we are all familiar with. And the destination to whom it was written, it's a big question. But generally it is believed that it was written to the Jewish Christians who lived in Alexandria. And the Jewish Christians who underwent a lot of experience of strangeness, experience of otherness. They had raised questions about the domination of Gentile Christians and other dominant Christian groups, Hellenistic Christian groups in the first century. And they were at the edges. They were at the receiving end. They were oppressed by the dominant people. So they naturally raised questions about their identity. So the destination is probably the Jewish Christians who lived in Alexandria. Talking about the author, some of the old Bibles, it is said it's Paul, but it's very clear it's not Paul. It is written by a Jewish scholar belonging to the school of Philonic. You might have heard of Philo, a Jewish historian, a scholar who was influenced by Philonic philosophy. Probably Apollos, and that is the theory put forward by many New Testament scholars. Apollos promoted the idea of connecting Old Testament with the Jesus movement. Old Testament understanding of a messianic expectation with New Testament Christology. Old Testament understanding of faith with New Testament understanding of faith. Old Testament understanding of covenant with New Testament understanding of covenant. And the central portion of Book of Covenant is all about land. Land being the destination of faith. You need a land, and you are given a land, and you are associated with the land. You are associated with your ecosystem. You are associated with your eco framework, your environment. So there is no theological articulation apart from land in Book of Hebrews. Therefore, the study of Book of Hebrews is very important in order to understand the idea of land and ecological concerns. As a New Testament researcher, I would say this is one book that connects Old Testament Jubilee themes with Jesus' proclamation of Kingdom of God. That's why we study Book of Hebrews. Old Testament Jubilee themes are well connected with New Testament understanding of Kingdom of God. When Jesus talks about Kingdom of God, he doesn't refer to a kind of land geographical occupation of Kingdom of God. It's not a geopolitical concept. It's a kind of spiritual concept, virtual concept, symbolic concept. But the whole universe is controlled by the reign of God. Whereas in Book of Hebrews, still people of God and their identity is associated with land. That's why we show interest as Earth Bible Project or ecological reading or eco study or eco theological understanding or eco hermeneutics. We show interest because the land is presented as an entry point to understand the theme of Book of Hebrews. I don't want to mention so many themes and so many special themes discussed in the Book of Hebrews. But you should know, as students and part of study project, the main framework of Book of Hebrews. Book of Hebrews generally presents a framework in presenting the Logos in a broader way. John chapter 1, 1 to 14 and the Book of Hebrews 1, 1 to 4 are more or less equal. We say this is a creation story retold in Hebrews. It is about God's revelation, and God's revelation can happen through the earth, through the land, and through the environment, through the ecosystem where you live. That is the significance of Book of Hebrews. It is not a kind of symbolic or spiritual presentation that we have in the Book of Hebrews. Rather, it connects people of God with the environment and ecosystem where they live. So when we talk about our eco concerns and eco hermeneutical framework, this book gives us sufficient insights to understand the framework of ecological knowledge, ecological insights to move forward. So land is important, and all the figures mentioned in the Book of Hebrews are attached with certain tags: strangers, aliens, sojourners, and citizens. Abraham, Moses, and many other people whose names are mentioned, all mentioned as strangers, as aliens, sojourners, pilgrims. So faith is described as a kind of pilgrim. In today's context of refugees and people on the move, people are on exodus, it is important. You can just imagine what's happening in Europe and other parts of the world in terms of refugees and the situation in Book of Hebrews. A group of people who settled in Alexandria had an identity crisis, thinking of their land, thinking of their identity, thinking of their covenant, thinking of their God, raising questions about the proper interpretation of Messiah. Here comes a document. Here, an author of Book of Hebrews comes with a document giving them sufficient insight to connect their faith with the land, connect their faith with the promised land, connect with their faith with the environment where they live. And it also talks about the Sabbath rest. It also talks about relationship between other creatures, relationship between other communities, and the need to have a kind of bilateral or multilateral relationship between various groups who live in that part of the world. That's why the book of Hebrews gives us sufficient key, I would say password, to understand the theology of how to connect Old Testament with the New Testament, how to connect Old Covenant with the New Covenant. Land is very important. And for us, the challenge is, how do we see that concern of land? Whether we see that as a kind of small geographical location, small piece of place where we need to occupy and say, this is the land and this is the fulfillment of God's promise, or we need to convert wherever we live, whatever be the part of universe, into the promised land, into a land where freedom, equality, and justice prevail. I think the message of book of Hebrews in general offers that, to make the covenant with all creatures, make the covenant with all communities, make the covenant with not only with the small piece of land, but with the entire universe, earth. That is the theme of book of Hebrews. So remember these three things. One, to know and study book of Hebrews, you need to know Old Testament very well, Old Testament history very well, and Old Testament terminology is very well. Two, the Hellenistic and the New Testament, the Greek information is absolutely important to understand book of Hebrews. Three, the theology of New Testament in terms of Christ, in terms of church, are reflected in the book of Hebrews, including the geographical situation where Jewish people lived, particularly in Alexandria. To the broader themes mentioned in book of Hebrews, starting from Christology to Messiah, to covenant, then the pneumatology, and the promised land, and faith. And the third aspect is the whole question of land. Land is interpreted. Its horizon is widened. The meaning is presented in a deeper manner. The land is not simply the Palestine, the promised land, but the land where you live. Karnataka, Andhra, Samoa, Nigeria, or California, wherever people of God live, you need to have a relationship with the land, because it's a promised land. The earth is given to you because it's God's earth. It's God's land. So the promise comes through the environment where you live. This is the introduction before I move to the articles, and I give you a small space as promised to raise questions and if you have any clarifications. I hope you have the copies of the articles given to you, study materials given to you.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Then I'll take first Alan Cardwell's article, Earth as Host or Stranger, reading Hebrews 11 from Diaspora Experience. It's a tough article. Tough in the sense we can just glance through and say this is wonderful. But if you read in a deeper way, this article will shake our faith. This article will shake the pillars of our traditional understanding of faith, then give us a new framework of faith. So I draw your attention to the article. If you can see through your screen or print version, you can see the first page, or you can just listen to me. I will use the article and then I'll explain later. You can study the article. This article talks about earth as host or stranger, a question, and Hebrews 11 is interpreted. Hebrews 11 is a very famous passage for pulpit sermon. We always glorify the faith of Abraham, thinking that Abraham was given everything by God in a very comfortable and luxurious way, and he had everything. Did not have any encounter or challenge. But this article uh, tells us very clearly Abraham was a stranger moving from one place to the other. However, in his strange situation, in his diaspora situation, in his situation of insecurity, he became a host to many strangers. That's why he is known as the father of all believers. I think we just glorify Abraham as the person who had covenant with God, who had initiated the covenantal experience with God. But we don't see the real life challenges he had to face. He was a refugee. All through his years, he had a lot of confrontations. But Abraham became a host to the stranger. And this first paragraph I read for your information. Hebrews 11 has a carefully constructed elevation in the movement of writing. Traditionally, it has been interpreted as a collation of traditional heroes who are exemplars for the contemporary community. Then the article talks about a number of scholars, including Caseman and other New Testament scholars, talking about Abraham. Abraham is presented as a person who is going for a pilgrim, but through wilderness, through the place where nothing was there, and strange experiences. But God has been with him. I think when we compare that with today's context, that is very important. Today's context, we sometimes glorify the strangers, aliens, refugees, migrants, saying that churches help them. But how the strangers and aliens emerge in today's context? Is it not due to the inequalities prevail in the society? See, Israel-Palestinian war, 50 years or 60 years long war, created lakhs of migrants. And now the Ukraine-Russia war pushed almost 1 crore people into the status of refugees. I think in chapter 11, and according to this article, Jewish history had a long tradition of civil wars and uncertainties. Maccabean revolt, we always say Maccabean revolt resisted the empire. But Maccabean revolt as a revolt and as a cause for civil war created lot of uneasiness among the people. Lot of uneasiness in terms of destabilizing the people. When we take some policy decisions by the government for a new development activity, governments will not think that it will destabilize them. It will destabilize the farming, agricultural land. It will destabilize the people's basic life framework. Simply say Holy Land and Abraham and chapter 11. But how the experiences of Abraham made a refugee to the father of the believers. That is the chunk of this article. And very interestingly, this article argues any offense to earth and its pilgrim is punishable. See, that's very important. Abraham stayed in one place, moved to another place, then encountered with many people. He had confrontations with many people, but that offense, we can brand that as a diaspora experience. But that offense created a lot of issues in Old Testament faith history. Coming to India, we have a very famous historian, namely Romila Thapar. Romila Thapar says, your job is to encourage and equip people to reclaim their history. We, as the members of Church of South India, we have that task. The people of God belonging to our church or sister churches, enable and equip them to reclaim their history. Here, Abraham moving from one place to another place, fortunately, his history is recorded. His story is recorded. his story is interpreted by the writers of Old Testament, and that comes in the book of Hebrews. And the first part I mentioned about David de Silva. David de Silva is a scholar, New Testament scholar, who interpreted book of Hebrews from socio-rhetorical reading. It is not a traditional reading. Traditional reading simply says this is a spiritual reading and it's a faith. It's also you obey the covenant, be obedient, don't ask questions about the land. What happened to the land? Whether land was destroyed, land was abused, don't ask such questions. When I offered this course to so many MDH batches, one batch consistently raised the question of land. Then I had some interest. I asked them why. Some of them were from Mizoram and Nagaland. They said, see, we have a lot of development, but our farming system, agricultural system is totally destroyed. So we would like to interpret book of Hebrews from that angle. And they contributed some articles and some class presentations. We as preachers and pastors and participants of this course, we can definitely relook some of the traditional concepts and redefine some of our traditional concepts in terms of understanding book of Hebrews in a meaningful way. I mentioned in my first part about the Jews in Alexandria. And this article also says the Jews in Alexandria had a growing fragility of existence. Growing fragility of existence. Tell me which community today is safe. Every community experiences this type of fragility of existence. Jesus movement experienced that. As a result, Jesus had to pay the price. And then later in the Acts of Apostle and other books, we see some of those expressions. And the Egyptians continued to be colonized people, though we say Israelites were liberated. And so many colonized people and people who experienced hegemonic experiences demonstrated their own problems here. And the main argument of this article is enable the people of God to rebuild the relationship. In terms of understanding evangelion, gospel, the basic meaning of etymological study will tell us evangelion means when you occupy a new land, you make a herald, and that herald is called evangelion, gospel. And the book of Hebrews clearly says that you move from one place to another place, you move from one stage of faith to another stage of faith, then you make this herald in terms of rebuilding the relationship. And chapter 11 of book Hebrews clearly gives us this indication. This is a vivid picture, crystal clear picture. What is faith? Faith is a mandate given to us to rebuild our relationship. The relationships are multi-layered, political, social, geographical, and economical. We define our relationship only with the spiritual realm, at the spiritual realm, and neglecting most of the other realms. And you need to know the understanding of faith and understanding of spiritual definition will have definitely political, social, geographical, and economic dimensions. And chapter 11 also presents so many heroes of faith. And the chapter describes them as heroes of faith. And every character is studied separately by New Testament scholars. And every character has a long history. Suppose you talk about Abraham. Abraham is still very fresh in our faith memory, in our discussion, in all our discourses. Why? Because that was the challenge Abraham took in terms of moving from his safe zone to the called zone. Calling given to Abraham to embrace the covenant was a call to leave the safe zone, move to the unsafe. and the called son, I would say, that called out community son. And Abraham moved there, and he has given the land a new meaning. Parallels of this chapter can be seen in Philo's writing. Philo was a Jewish historian who interpreted Jewish scriptures in a very meaningful manner. And then Philo's writings we can see. Then Jews, how they had that strange experience. It's not because they did not have the share of power in the society where they lived. They felt the strangeness, but they did not have land. Think about the millions of people who had no land, who do not have a piece of land. So they all experience that strange strangeness. So in that sense, as Abraham took care of strangers, aliens, and Abraham became host to all the strangers and aliens, we also have the responsibility to understand that. Later, there was a kind of imperial intervention in the to liberate the people of Jews from Alexandria, giving them some sorts of land. By that time, I think most of the Jews embraced Christianity, and Christianity began to grow. This is not only the experience of people in Alexandria and the destination or the recipients of Book of Hebrews, but this is the experience of people all over the world. All over the world, we see such kind of people. That is a chunk of this article. And this article initially presents chapter 11 as a mandate explaining the faith aspect in connection with the land. You need a piece of land to understand and taste the value of life. Then this article talks about the heroes of faith, whose names are mentioned in chapter 11. Then its connection with the Jewish historian Philo. Therefore, this interpretation, this study by the scholar Cadwalder is very important because it questions the traditional linguistic constructions. Not only construction of faith, construction of earth. The land has been given a prominent place in the New Testament, but somehow the interpreters of New Testament has generally neglected the prominence of land. Because in Palestine, when Jesus ministered, most of the people who followed Jesus had no land. They were crowds. So lot of meaning or meaning embossed in terms of kingdom of God, reign of God, virtual, symbolic dimension. But here this article, Alan Cadwalder says, no, you need to construct the importance of earth, importance of land in your studies. Very interesting point that you see in page 158. Hebrews is informed by a Jewish commitment to Christ. That is important. Book of Hebrews is not written to glorify Jewish people or to glorify Old Testament characters and other heroes of faith, but to present a very clear Christological understanding of faith, on which the early Christianity and the Christian church had been built. This is the challenge put forward by this article. And Alan says it's a counter-coherent reading of strangers, exiles upon earth. I would say why we should ask the question why the refugees and migrants constantly appear in our place. Why the people are always uprooted. Why the people are becoming strangers always. If we seriously raise that question, we can easily relate to first century Alexandria with 21st century South India. First century Alexandria with the experiences of the people all over the world, whether people in Europe or people in Africa, people in other parts of the world or Asian countries. Then this article brings very interesting hermeneutical point explaining the meaning and significance of the life experience of Ruth. Ruth, her life is connected with land. Her life is connected with the identity of land. Her identity is connected with the framework of land, and that is explained. Then it is also connected with the Old Testament, the heroes, namely Jacob, Abraham, other heroes who experienced exile to protect faith. Finally, this article tells us earth as host. Earth as host. Earth is not a property. Earth is not a commodity. Earth is not an economical currency. Earth as host. We are guests. We are given earth, and earth embraces us. Earth welcomes us, and we enter into earth and experience and explore the fruits of the earth, not spoiling, destroying, abusing earth. Potentially friendly communities are maintained by earth as a host. That's a beautiful idea put forward by this article. Earth, in fact, is given a value and mutuality of relationship with humanity that defies Roman imperial efforts to ground a hierarchical layered structure in land. Page 162. How Earth becomes host? Earth becomes host by allowing us to live on Earth, by allowing us to cultivate, by allowing us to eat fruits from Earth, by allowing us to relate God through Earth. And Earth thus becomes a channel to understand God, to experience God, to fulfill the meaning of covenant. And this is a formula given to us. The formula given to us by this article is earth as a host. And this book of Hebrews, particularly chapter 11, has a definite commitment to promote Christ as the destination of all the faith journey. And Abraham as a pilgrim. Abraham is presented as a person who encountered so many faith questions, but everything is through earth. The next time when you see the issue of strangers, aliens, and other without space, without land, remember this earth is a host. And we are given an opportunity to enter into the earth, to use the earth, to receive fruits from the earth, to live on earth, and share its resources with other people. That is the meaning of this beautiful but tough article. Thank you. This is the end of the second session. Any questions, concerns? I'm happy to spend some time before moving to the third part and final part of the presentation. Thank you, Reverend Sanjeev. I think we met a couple of times.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah, this is in fact very significant in terms of landless people in our country, particularly Dalits and tribals. This is a good comment that you made to take us to the next article. When we talk about the land, there is a hostility, particularly in some parts of India. If you consider earth as host, then the land is everyone. Land will not become a kind of economic commodity. At least in the mission compounds and the church premises, we can maintain that sanctity. I think that is what Professor Matthew Koshi has been trying to create green church, green compounds, green environment, rebuild the relationship, so on. Thank you for the comment. I think I'll go to the next article. Next article is written by Salewa from Samoa. burning the land. An eco-justice reading of Hebrews 6, 7, and 8. I read from New KJV. For the earth which drinks in the rain that often comes upon it, and bears herbs useful for those by whom it is cultivated, receives blessing from God. But if it bears thorns and briars, it is rejected and near to being cursed, whose end is to be burned. Many biblical scholars took the first part and interpreted this passage very well. But here, Lutisone Salevo, a Samoan scholar, takes the phrase burning the land, an eco-justice reading of Hebrews 6, 7, and 8. Some of us coming from the village background know very well about the burning of the land. After some sugar cane, for example, after sugar cane 1 or 2 seasons, we burn the land, and some other crops also we have that practice. But here, that is not the idea mentioned here. Rather, you destroy the land and you completely reject the land. You being hostile, you express your hostility to the land. That's why this text is called hard text, not a difficult text, but a text gives us some hard meaning, and we need to be careful in terms of interpreting this text. I have a friend who is a liberation theologian, and namely Bishop Lowry Green. He has written a world famous book, Doing Theology. It talks about liberation theology. In some parts of the book, he talks about how the Israelites occupied Palestine and destroyed their livelihood. The olive trees were destroyed, and they put fire, and everything was destroyed. Even people died, people were killed through that burning the land. Though this passage talks superficially about burning the land, thorns and other things, but the Samoan experience expressed by Zalevo is very clear, and it is a kind of hostile, hard, difficult understanding of the text. Burning the land becomes burning part of me, he says. Burning part of me. Burning the land, earth, in Greek it is gay. That word is used. So you you attack the land and you take revenge on earth, then the land is destroyed. Ironically, as she says, my own land is also likely to be destroyed, not by fire, but by water. You know, the author comes from an island. There, flood is a frequent issue. Tsunami is a frequent issue. Earthquakes are frequently there. And this article talks about the Samoan experience where they consider land as the source of life. Samoan experience where you have the land and you build up the land, but suddenly it will be destroyed. There was a CSI missionary sent by Council for World Mission, a missionary couple with their 2 young children to one of the remote islands some 10 years back. They built up a small mission center and a small church in one of the remote islands. But after 8 years of hard work, there was a small tsunami and earthquake, everything was destroyed. And they had to leave. And the New Zealand government sent the rescue operations and rescued them. Then after a few years, the missionary made an inquiry. What happened to these native people? They survived because for them, it's a usual thing. And they went to their hideouts and they adjusted with the fluctuations happened in the land. And this article, first 3 pages, talking about their own environment and the destructions and the impositions and occupations, hegemonic articulations happened in terms of spoiling their land. That's why this article raising a lot of questions. This is not an isolated article. There is a group of scholars headed by Gianna Havia, who taught at Gurukul Theological Seminary for some time, Gurukul Theological College for some time. Under him, a number of biblical scholars are constantly working to bring the issue of land, eco-justice, and land as a source of life for the Samoan people. They are a kind of I would say symbolic figure, symbolic people, icons to understand how people are attached to the land. And the land is considered as the source of life. Article page 223 reads like this. The relationship between the land and the people is a symbiotic one, operating to mutual benefit of both parties. No question of life without land. This idea evokes a cosmology reflected in Genesis, a cosmology reflected in Book of Job, a cosmology reflected in many Psalms. That is so Samoan people's experience of land as the source of life is very important. Where does life come? Paul raised that question. John raised that question. And here Hebrews chapter 6 giving us a possibility of connecting this with the covenant, earthly covenant, and the earth as the source of life. And human beings are made of clay, earth. And Jesus uses earth as a channel of healing. And Samoan experience is called the realistic view of here and now. And the article brings Johannine understanding of eschatology. The salvation is here and now. This article claims this understanding could create a lot of ecological consciousness in their environment, their church, their religion, to move forward with a new understanding of land as the source of life. With this background, the author takes us to the content of the text. And there is a new approach to read the text. In seeking justice for the earth and its components, the analysis proceeds on the suspicion that the text, the traditions behind the text, later interpreters of the text are likely to have devalued the earth. You agree with me or not? There are a lot of biblical scholars who have not paid attention or respect to understand the meaning and value of earth. Earth is the source of life, starting from Genesis to Revelation. Revelation talks about a new heaven and new earth. I am coming to that lecture after a couple of weeks. New heaven and new earth. So earth is a source of life, and God's covenant is always established and described with the help of earth. We in our campus have maintained some pits for rainwater harvest. Last time when we had a flood, I realized that the pits are there, but it's not connected properly with the well. So we are making arrangements to store the water. This verse 6 talks about storing the water, receiving the rain, and keeping it, preserving it to promote life. So see, all things are connected. Rain, water, earth, life, and its final product. And this article, page 226, connects that with the Christ's death and resurrection. And the restoration of people of God by connecting the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Author clearly invites us to see what will happen if you promote the idea of burning the land. Burning the land means burning our livelihood, burning our environment, burning our people. And I think bombing that's happening in Europe and other kind of destructions by using fire are are described in this line. That is the burning the earth. We are burning the life, and we can promote fauna and flora of our environment if we have a mind not to burn the earth, but to promote life. And this verse 7, according to the article, the welfare of the rest of the earth community is completely ignored. The survival of the fauna and flora of the earth is sacrificed in the interest of human survival. You destroy anything for your interest. You destroy any element on earth, any institution on earth, any fauna and flora of the earth for your survival in the name of development. You cannot even raise a question of resistance, not only in the field of environment, but other terms, other means and other frameworks where we want to maintain values and the dignity of earth. Finally, this article says the land is our source of life and a living entity. Without land, there is no life. Without land, there is no living entity. The Greek word used there is tikto. Tikto means the bearing fruit, childbirth. That type of powerful verse is used. And the earth may indeed have cried out to the writer of Hebrews, and it did to the other biblical writers, but voice has been silenced, the article claims. So it's our responsibility to reinterpret this passage by promoting the framework of earth, the life in connection with the earth, so that we'll be able to stop burning earth by promoting the life on earth. This is a beautiful article, Burning the Land. Eco-justice reading of Hebrews 6, 7, and 8. Friends, we tried to see three things today. First, Book of Hebrews is not a simple document dealing with the spiritual faith aspects, but it's a very powerful historical and theological document connecting Old Testament with the New Testament, interpreting the Christ event by using the Old Testament language. It also connects covenant, commandment, and other Old Testament rituals and mandates in terms of earth. We have not been given any command, any mandate from God, by God, to destroy earth, but only to protect earth. Second article written by Alan is again a beautiful article talking about Hebrews chapter 11. Abraham and other heroes of faith and their contribution to promote faith, and ultimate intention in writing chapter 11 or book of Hebrews as an entire document is to interpret Christ in a wider manner. So the Christ element and then the Christological interpretation in connection with the earth as host, so that the church will be an agent of promoting earth as host. Finally, the article written by Saliavo on Samoan people is no question of burning the land. That will destroy life from earth. So we are given an opportunity to promote life, to protect life, to liberate these type of interpretation, the text from these type of interpretation. Thank you very much for your patient listening. If you have any question, kindly put it in the chat box. I'll be happy to interact.